Always a pleasure, John, chatting to you. We're still none the wiser as to details of this, but is this a smokescreen or genuine response to the pandemic for America?
Well, I think with Donald Trump, you can usually attribute it to a smokescreen or at least a distraction. And I'm afraid that in this case, I don't want to sound too cynical, but he issued a tweet very late last night where he said that he was taking action against the invisible enemy, the COVID, and even as he's telling states to loosen up and liberalize their economies, open up their economies. But nevertheless, it's against the COVID, and it's to protect jobs, great American jobs, as he said in his tweet. Then administrative officials immediately tried to calm things down and say this is not a substantial change in policy. It's a temporary halt, which in fact doesn't really mount to very much because he's already constricted so much of the immigration. This has been a political platform of his, you know, the wall against Mexico. He's been anti-immigrant the whole administration. So I think he's thrown this little piece of meat to his 60+ million or whoever it is followers on Twitter.
He's been anti-immigrant his whole administration. Of course, this is an election year. How exactly do you see this working?
Well, I think that's the point to make. We're on the eve tonight of hearing from our president on his latest concerns about how you open up the economy and this double crisis. He started in March with the lockdown, the very time that Donald Trump sounded fairly promising about blocking travel from China. Then Donald Trump got himself into a shambolic mess because he didn't really want to close down his glorious economy with the stock market booming, and so he just couldn't bring himself to tighten up. And as a result, as you indicated earlier, 800,000 cases in the U.S., that's a third of the world's total, and it's about 10 times as many as China reports it's had of COVID, where it all started. So I'm very cynical, frankly, about this ploy. I do think it sends the wrong message internationally when we should be figuring out ways to cooperate. But most importantly, I feel so sad for the tragedy of the loss of life in America because the administration has failed to do what, in fact, our administration has done here, which is to take the hard choices and hard decisions, explain them to the South African people or the American people, and try to get people on board. But he hasn't done that. He's left it to the states.
Right, massive loss of life in the United States. 22 million Americans have lost their jobs, and as we mentioned, more than 700,000 cases of the coronavirus. He's also approved of protesters who oppose to stay at home, wanting for the economy, as you mentioned, also to be open. What do you think this will do for his chances come elections?
Now that's the great imponderable. I don't know what'll happen. I was wrong in 2016. Certainly his polling numbers have weakened considerably. It seems, though, that most voters do blame him for the shambolic way that he's run this campaign against the COVID virus. And he is constantly contradicting himself because he did say, after saying he was going to be the sole authority on determining when to open the economy. Then he turns and says it's to the states to decide. Then he turns around most recently this week and says, no, I think those who are trying to liberalize against their Democratic governors, which is pure politics, should be allowed to do so. They should protest. They should resist because we want to have an open economy. We want to get back to normal. Well, he says that he bases his decisions on science and facts, and he accuses the head of the WHO for not doing that. But in fact, he never consults with his scientists other than Anthony Fauci, the God love him, and Bricks, the woman who handles this for him in the White House. But then he overrules all the time, or he sends out a tweet like he did last night. And by the way, you know, there are only 400,000 visas that are granted for immigration each year in the United States. And you're rightly talking about 20 million unemployed, so the numbers don't add up.
John, before we let you go, please allow me to be an opportunist here and bring it back to the continent. You do a lot of work extensively on the continent, and let's take a look perhaps at some of the response that many countries have taken on the continent that have been battered by a lot of other issues. And add to this, what have you made of how we are dealing with where we are?
Where South Africa is so far has been a splendid display for the world, not just for Africa, of having this issue of the lockdown, and the people have supported President Ramaphosa because he and Minister Mkhize and Dr. Zamin have made it a convincing argument for doing what we're doing. Now the real hard work begins in addressing the second question, which is the economic crisis, which I gather he's going to do tonight. But as an example to Africa, this is important. However, it may not be relevant. This is a much more developed country. And so what I would plea for is that President Ramaphosa, in partnership with the AU that he's now head of and this year, and the WHO, make certain that when a vaccine does come along that will destroy this virus, Africa gets its oar in early and fully and cheaply for getting the vaccines or therapies out here, because that's what's really going to stop this virus. It's not going to be by lockdown.
A big thank you to Professor John Stramlau. He's an international relations professor at the University of Witwatersrand.